Hi, I'm Lucy from Sew Essential and I'm here today to show you the traditional method for lining a waistcoat, or a vest as it's called in America. So this is the traditional method for bagging out the lining. I'll show you step by step how to do it. And the waistcoat pattern I'm using is Butterick 6901. It's the one I'm wearing. You'll find it on our website. You'll also find the fabrics I used on our website, and I'll pop links to all of that below. And there's also a link to our weekly newsletter for a healthy dose of sewing inspiration straight to your inbox. But I'll just show you the finished waistcoat before we get into the tutorial. So it's got really cute faux welt pockets on the front there, a button down front, and then it is fully lined. It's also got a waist tie on the back and a little V at the back as well, but it's a great pattern, a lot of fun to sew, especially if you try this method for the lining. So you can see I've fully lined it there in our anti-static polyester lining. But yeah, let's get started now with the tutorial. So the first thing you're going to do is sew the darts, any darts, in all of your bodice pieces, front and back, in both the lining and the main fabric. And then you're going to take your front lining fabric and your front main fabric. So we've got the blue denim as the main fabric in this example and some red cotton as the lining. And you're going to put them right sides together, and you're going to sew the centre front neckline seam, the centre front and across the bottom, but then stop there, leave the side seam open, and then at that stage you might want to understitch before you sew your armhole seam. For anyone who doesn't know, an understitch is where you push the seam allowances underneath the lining fabric like so. So the seam allowances are sitting underneath the lining fabric, and then you would stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line, and that just makes your lining fabric lie nice and flat and stay tucked away when everything's turned the right way out. If you did do that at that stage, you've just got to make sure when you then come to sew the armhole seam that everything is lining up and matching up nicely, and then you're not going to be able to understitch the armhole seam, but you might be able to just understitch a little bit at either end because you won't be able to get in there once the rest of these seams are sewn. But just to recap, you're sewing down the centre front all the way along the bottom, and then stopping there, leaving your side seam open, and then you're sewing the armhole seam and leaving the shoulder seam open. Once you've done that, as you can see, I've clipped and graded and trimmed the seams. I've clipped around the armhole. That you should always clip any curves like that because it just enables the fabric to lie nice and flat when it's turned through. And then once you've done all of that, you're going to turn it through like I have done here and give it a good press. Make sure that your lining fabric's tucked away and hidden away on the wrong side, but you've got everything prepared there for that front piece. So I'm going to do the same on this one, just turn it through. So the way that we do that is just to go through that open side seam there. We can use that and just turn it through the right way. And then I would take that to the iron and give it a good press. And because I've clipped around those curves, you can see that that armhole seam is sitting nicely, and you just want to fiddle around with any corners. Just make sure your corners are nice and sharp. Got various different tools on the website that you can use, corner shapers and different things like that to get nice sharp corners. But yeah, just make sure all of those are turned through, and then you'd take that away and give that a good press, and then you'd have your two front bodice pieces ready there. And then the other thing you want to do at this stage is just take your back pieces. So I've got the back bodice pieces here. Again, I've sewn the darts, and I've also sewn the centre back seam on both the main fabric and the lining fabric. So we've now got both of our front bodice pieces turned through, and now we're going to get to the really clever bit. So you're going to take your front bodice piece and you're going to put it right sides together with your back bodice piece. I'm just going to move this into the centre so that you've got a better view of what I'm doing. So you can see I've got the shoulder seam here. Now obviously the shoulder seams aren't going to match up because you've turned your front bodice through with the lining. So all you need to do is just leave 5/8 either side on your back bodice piece, and then you just need to pin that in place because, yeah, I would recommend you tack it to this layer first, because what we're going to do, which is the really clever bit, is we're going to sandwich the front bodice pieces between the back lining and the back main fabric, and it's just so clever how this works. I love this technique. So you're going to repeat that same process on the side seam as well. Leave a 5/8 gap either side, because obviously this is going to be narrower than your back piece because you've turned it through, you've got your seam allowances in there, so you want to leave that 5/8 gap either side, and then I'm just going to tack that, and then I'll repeat this for the other side of the bodice as well. So I'll just take the other front bodice piece, line it up like so, tack that in place, and then again the side seams I will just tack in place, leaving the 5/8 seam allowance either side of that front piece. Okay, so I've now tacked the shoulder seams together and I've tacked the side seams together. One thing I should have said is that on one side you want to leave a gap of a few inches. So apologies for that if you were doing this as you were watching sort of thing. Just unpick a section of one of the side seams because you need to leave a gap, because that is where we're going to turn everything through when we come to it. So I've got that secured, and then now all you need to do is put your lining right sides together, your back lining right sides together, and then you're going to pin this in place across the shoulder seams, around the armholes and all the way around, but you're going to leave that same gap again as we did here. You're going to leave that same gap in this layer as well, but then you're going to sew all the way around the bottom. When you're sewing it, you just need to make sure that your front pieces are out of the way, so that they're moved out of the way, so that you're only sewing through the layers of the back bodice pieces. You don't want to be sewing through the front layers where you're sewing around the bottom here, or the armholes, or across the neckline. At the side seams, you are going through all layers. You're going through your front and your back layers, and on one side you're going to leave a gap there. Okay, so I've now pinned everything in place. So I've got the front bodice pieces sandwiched between the back lining and the back main fabric, and you can see where the pins are is where I'm going to go and sew now with a normal stitch. I've pinned all the way around the armholes. You might find that the fabric sits a bit funny around the armholes when it's flat, but if you lift it when you're pinning it, you'll find it will match up properly. As long as your cutting out is right, it will match up properly. It's just, it might sit funny. It's probably partly due to some shoulder adjustments I make on my patterns that's happening as well. But don't worry about that. When you get to the machine, it will sit nice and flat. But I've pinned round the armhole, across the shoulder seams, around the neckline, across the other shoulder seam, round the armhole, down the side seams, across the bottom, and then on this side seam I've left that same gap again as we did on the tacking layer. I've also taken care to make sure that I'm not going to catch those front bodice pieces anywhere I shouldn't. So you do want to go through all 4 layers on your side seams. You want to go through your 2 back bodice pieces and your front lining and main fabric on your side seams, and you also want to do that at your shoulder seams, but you don't want to catch those front pieces anywhere else. You could easily catch them at the bottom here, but just tuck them in so that you're not going to. And when you come to do the sewing as well, you'll actually be able to feel at the corners where the join is with the front bodice piece. So as you're sewing, you'll be able to feel that, and then you just want to stitch nice and closely to where that front bodice piece is sitting there, where it is actually supposed to be attached as you come down this side. So you'll stitch that side, and as you come down here, you'll feel there where that front bodice piece is, and just get your stitches nice and close to that as you go around the corners on the side seams and the shoulder seams. But I'm going to go away to the machine now, stitch all that together with the standard stitch, and then I'll come back and show you the real magic for when we turn it through. Okay, so now everything is sewn together, and I've still left that gap at the side seam here, so I've sewn all the way around the bottom edge, up the side seams, around the armholes, across the shoulders, around the neckline, across the other shoulder, around the armhole. I did say that that will sit a bit funny initially, but once you turn it through and you clip and trim your seams, that will sit nicely. If you do want any tips on clipping and trimming and grading seams, because I've talked about that quite a lot in this video, there is a tutorial for that on my channel, so just check that out. I'll try and remember to pop a link below for you. But now what we're going to do, you will need to clip and trim all of these seams, but what I like to do with this first of all is just turn it through and just see if everything looks how it should do before you start clipping and trimming seam allowances away. So what we're going to do is just reach in through that gap, and I'm working with the denim is a really thick fabric, so you do need to bear that in mind when you're leaving a gap. But then you'll be able to grab one of the front bodice pieces, and you can just pull it through like so, and you can just check everything looks all right. It'll look messy round corners and things because you will need to reduce those seam allowances round those areas, but you can just check everything is how you want it to be, and just keep pulling the fabric through, and it'll just turn it all through that little hole. And this is what's referred to as bagging out, which you will hear when people are talking about lining various different garments. They'll say they bagged the lining out, and this is what that means. And there you go, as if by magic. It's like a magic trick. I just love the way it works and how it all comes together. You can see that we've now got a lined waistcoat, so you can check everything's matching up nicely. Some of this as well, once you've trimmed and graded your seams, will match up a bit better. Once you've clipped around your neckline, that will sit nicely. But you can just check all the relevant parts that you want to. Just make sure your armholes are lining up nicely. Check you're happy with all of that. And then you'll want to go back in and clip and trim and grade everything. But there you have it, your waistcoat is now lined. And then for the final step, all you want to do is find your side seam. You've got your gap in your side seam there, and all I did with that is just hand sewed a slip stitch to close that gap. And I did the same on the inside, but because your seams are sort of sewn together, it naturally will come over. You could give that a press first and then hand sew that, but that is the traditional tailoring method for how to line a waistcoat. So I do hope you enjoyed that tutorial today. There are tons more tutorials on our channel, so do check those out. And if you like what you see today, please like and subscribe, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.